in my README, go ahead and copy and paste it into the right areas. So we've got an H1, and that's where we're going to replace with our big heading, meet new and interesting dogs nearby. And then I'm going to delete this paragraph element because we don't actually have it in our final design. And I'm going to change the two buttons to both say download. In addition to the download, there's obviously two SVGs as well, and these are the icons from Bootstrap. But remember, I mentioned that you can get hold of these SVGs in the README file. So I'm going to wholesale just copy this Apple SVG and paste it into here, add a space between the SVG and download, and now hopefully we have a good looking Apple symbol in the download button. And I'm going to do the same with the Google Play logo. Hit save, and that's it. There it is. We're going to change the color scheme here a little bit. We've got a button light and we've got a button outline light so that it would look the same as the final design. Now, right now, this button is a button primary, so we're going to have to change that to light, and this one, instead of button outline secondary, we're going to change that to button outline light. Let's hit save and see what we have. Now you'll notice that this button's almost completely disappeared, if not for this rollover effect. And the reason is because it's more or less a white outline. In order for this to show, we need a background. So let's go ahead and set it up with this CSS gradient background. Remember, I mentioned that if you look inside the style.css file, there is already a class called gradient background, which we can add into our HTML for it to show up. Now, where do we add it? Before we can add it, we need to import our CSS. And as always, we put our custom CSS after the Bootstrap. So in case there are any collisions in terms of targeting the same selectors, the final one wins out, which hopefully is our CSS. So I'm going to link to the style.css, and then I'm going to put that class gradient background into my title section. So where do I put it? Now, if I put it inside the container, you'll see that it's only inside the container, and the container's got these big margins on the left and right, so this is not the look that we want. Instead, we're going to put this inside the section. We can't put it into the ID because it's not an ID, it's actually a class. So make sure you've got it set inside the class property. Now let's take a look, and this looks pretty good. Now the only difference between what we have and what we're aiming for is a lot of padding. Now the reason I can tell it's padding and not margin is because padding extends the background. So if this was an extra margin, then this area would be white, but instead it's actually the same as the background color. So where does this margin come from? Let's go ahead and hit inspect and make this just a little bit smaller so we can see this padding. And if we scroll up until we see the padding show up, you can see that orange down there when I hover over it. Well, that is what we need to get rid of. So you can see we've got padding top and padding bottom. And if we get rid of the top and bottom, it will look a little bit too much. So if we just target the bottom, then we've got more or less the right layout. So let's go in here and find that PY5 for the container, which is right here. And remember, the P stands for padding. The Y stands for the Y-axis, so it means it's adding padding to the top and the bottom. So if we want to change this to only have it on the top, then we change this to PT, padding top. And then we've got another div that has the padding on top and bottom as well, so let's change it there. And then when we go back, we should see that we have pretty much the same layout. And now if we compare our layout to the final outcome, it looks pretty much exactly the same. So we can now move on to our next section, which is the features section. If we open up our features goal, you can see that we've got 3 different areas with all the features that we want to show off. And we've got this sort of rough layout. if we go back to the Bootstrap examples, and if we look inside the snippets at the features, you can see this is pretty much the same layout as what we're aiming for. So let's go ahead and inspect and find that row that we need to get hold of. Let's copy the element and put it inside our index.html. Now, once we paste it in, let's hit save and see it. You can see this is occupying pretty much the entire full width, which is not quite what we want. We actually want it all to be roughly along the same vertical line. So why is this? Well, it's because the top level here is a Bootstrap row. If we want it to be contained, then we need to add a container. So let's add that container class, and then let's move this closing tag to wrap it around all of this. Hit save, and now you can see we've got that perfect alignment. The next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of all of these buttons, and that is pretty easy. They're just these anchor tags. So there's one there, there's one here, and there's one up here. So now we're pretty much on the design we're looking for. All we need to do is replace the text. This is probably a little bit boring, so I'm going to use video editing to speed things up a bit for you. Alright, so now that we've got all of our custom copy in, the final thing we need to fix are these SVGs. So let's go ahead and replace the SVGs that are in the example with the ones that we want. So the first one is going to be the checkmark SVG. Let's copy and paste it in. The second one is the graduation hat.
They keep saying what should be eliminated.
And the final one is the heart with an arrow through it. So now that we've replaced all of our SVGs, you can see them show up, but the background doesn't look quite the same. It should have these rounded corners, it should be a little bit larger, and when we look on the Bootstrap example where we copied our code from, they look perfect. But why is it that when it's in our website, it doesn't quite look the same? Now, this might be something that you got stuck on, but in order to figure this out, the easiest way is to inspect on it in Chrome. You can see right now I'm highlighting the SVG, but if I go one level above and hover on that div, that is the one with all of that fancy styling. And if we look inside the styles, you can see there's actually some custom CSS in here, because it's not in the utilities, which comes from Bootstrap. This is actually custom CSS just for this feature section. So what we need to do is we need to copy all of this CSS and put it inside our style.css. So now this icon square, which is the class for this div, can be activated, and when we look at it now, you can see that they all have the right styling that we expected. So the final thing we need to sort out is just to add a little bit more margin in this features section, and then we're pretty much done. So if we look at the features goal, you can see I've given you a hint that it's actually margin top 5. If we want to add some margin to this entire container, then we can go up to the div class where we have the container, and then we add margin top 5, empty-5. And now we should have enough space between that top title section and our feature section. So we're now ready to move on to the testimonial section. Again, let's take a look at the goal that we're looking for. So the first section is an H2 with an image and some paragraph text. This area comes from this Jumbotron section. And if we scroll down, we can see this full width Jumbotron right here. So let's go ahead and inspect on it. And let's take the entire section just after the divider. So let's copy the element and paste it into our testimonial section. Let's take a look at what that looks like. It looks pretty good, but we need to modify it for our purposes. So let's change the text inside. If we go over to our README, we should see our quote here from Pebbles, and we can replace the text inside the H1. remember from our HTML classes, we should only have one H1 per website. And remember at the beginning in our title section, we've already got our big heading. So here it should really not be an H1. Let's turn it into a subheading by changing that to an H2. Now, this paragraph element, I could delete it, but I'm actually going to keep it and use it for showing the name where the quote comes from, which is Pebbles from New York. And all I have to do now is add an image in between. And the image is going to be our dog image, and I'm going to add the alt text as well. Let's take a look at what that looks like. It looks great, other than the fact that this should be rounded and it should be a little bit smaller. If we look at the goal, we can see it should be 100 pixels high and it should be circular. So how do we make it custom? Well, we're going to need to create some styling, right? So let's create a class called profile-image, and let's set it to have a height of 100 pixels. And in order to make it circular, remember we need to set the border radius to 50%. Now if we apply that class to our image, profile-image, and we look at our website, you can see that looks pretty much perfect and similar to what we've got here. Now the only thing we need to add is just a little bit more margin. We should have a margin of 5 between these two sections and a margin of 2 between these two sections. So I'm just going to add some margin top to the image. So a size 5 margin to the image. So I can hit space on the class and then do margin top dash 5. And then for the text, I'm going to do a class of margin top dash 2. And now we should have enough space in between everything. And it looks pretty much the same as the example. Now we need to add in all of these outlets that have featured our startup. And you can see from the goal image here that we've got a 12-column grid here from Bootstrap, and they're each occupying a fourth of the space. But notice here where I've said it should take up 3 columns on desktop, but a full width 12 columns on mobile, so it should be responsive. And we can find all these images in the images folder. Let's go ahead and add that below this container. In order to create the Bootstrap 12-column layout system, the first thing we always need is a container. So let's create a div of class container. And inside here is where we need our div that has a class of row. So now we're ready to create our columns. Each of the columns are going to be 3 columns in the desktop format. So that's col-large or LG, and it's going to be -3. But on mobile, so col-SM small is going to be full width, so 12. And inside here we can place our image, which is from the images folder, and we're going to start off with TechCrunch, and I'm going to add the alt text as that. Now I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 times, and now I'm just going to replace each of these images with the ones that we have here. So Mashable, Business Insider, and TNW. Alright, so now we should have all of our images, but they are a little bit large. One thing we can do is we can limit their height so that they are all equal in height instead of having this uneven start and end line. So I'm going to set the height to 30, and that should be enough height to be visible, but not so much height that it takes up too much space. And that looks pretty good. So now we're done with our testimonial section, and we are on our penultimate section, which is the pricing plan. And as you'll remember, Bootstrap has the pricing plan section right here. And these 3 cards are the ones that we want to get hold of. So let's inspect on that and find the area that we need, which is probably this div row. So let's copy it and put it inside the pricing section. But as you remember, a div row needs to go inside a container. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we look at our pricing table, then it's already in and looks pretty good. The other section we need is a title for the pricing table, which is this area right here. And this is the div that contains all of that content. So let's just copy it and put it at the beginning of our container right here. So now we've pretty much got the pricing table down. We just need to update all of the text here to the ones that we have in our copy. So I'm going to do this again quickly. I'm going to fast forward and replace all the text. Alright, so now all the text has been replaced and you should see all of that text inside the pricing section. So now we need to update the design a little bit, and the main difference is the color scheme here is all using the Bootstrap primary color, which is this blue, but we need to change it all to the dark kind of color, which is this kind of black color. And if you look inside the pricing goal, you can see the parts that we need to change. This needs to become outline dark, this needs to be button dark, and this also needs to be dark. A shortcut here is to simply use the Control F on Windows or Command F on Mac in order to bring up our search bar. And if we search for the word primary and we replace it with dark, then we can actually go through each of these examples and see if we want to replace it. What I recommend doing is to actually do this one by one instead of doing replace all, because that way you can see which parts you're replacing. And many times I've done replace all only to find out that I've messed up the entire project in some big way. So just a word of advice, go through it one by one, make sure that it makes sense and it's the right area that you're changing. But hopefully when we go back to our website, we can see we've now updated all of the right places to this dark color scheme. Coming back to our pricing goal, we can see that this title needs to be an H2 and this subtitle needs to be a paragraph element. So let's go into our section and make sure that is the case, because when we copied it over, it actually gave us an H1. Now the styling is not going to change because it actually comes from the display 4 class, so you won't see the size change that much or the color scheme, because it is actually not dependent on the HTML element, and this happens very frequently with Bootstrap. So we're able to adjust that pretty easily. And now we're ready for our final section, which is the footer. So let's find ourselves the footer snippets, and let's find the one that looks like one that we want, or one that is similar to the one in the example, which is this one right here. And let's find the container that we can copy and put into our footer section. So now straight up we can see our footer section show up, and all we need to do is to adapt it to our design. Firstly, you'll notice there's this area that you can't really see, but when you hover it, it seems to be clickable. And if we refer to our code, you can see this is actually a link that links to the Bootstrap logo. So let's go ahead and delete that. But let's change this paragraph class to copyright and then the name of our company, Tindog. And I'm going to leave these links alone because, I don't know, maybe in the future you'll want to use this website and put in some different links to different sections. But for now, it just kind of looks more or less the right kind of style that we would want on a startup website. So let's leave that alone, but let's get rid of this border line here. And this border came from the footer, so there should be a hint in here. If we look at the footer element, you can see there's the border top class, which again comes from Bootstrap, but it's a really simple way of adding some borders to the top left or right. But once we delete it, then that's completely gone. So the final thing we need to do is just to add that gradient background to the footer area. and then we are pretty much done. So let's take that section footer
So being
and
at home
add the
isn't
class
such a bad thing
gradient
on the
background.
weekend, 'cause that's when I get my stuff done.
And now hit save,
Well, on
and
my
we
days
should
off when
see
I was
that
working,
we
that's
have
when I got all
almost
my
the same
laundry
website
and grocery
as
shopping
the
done.
final result. The only thing that we need to do now
And
is to
same
get
with
rid of this little bit of
any of
space
the
at
other
the
stuff
bottom.
that I had to get done.
And the
That's
fact
when
that
it's
it's
all done.
white should give you a hint as to what it is. If we
Look.
select our footer section and we go into the section, look inside the container, at some point our hover is going to show us where that margin comes from. And right here you can see that orange box showing that margin at the bottom. So if we select it, we should see
That's
there are
how I
some
used
margin
to
classes
do it,
applied.
like one day
So
for
there's a margin top,
shopping
which I
and
think we
getting
should
that all
probably
done, and
keep
the next
because it
day
adds
was to
good amount of spacing between the different
get all
sections.
my
But the margin bottom we could probably get rid of so that we don't have
chores
that
done
white
around the
space
house
down there.
and
So
back to
let's find
school
this
and work.
MY-5 class in our footer
The
element.
next day,
It's right here, and let's change it instead of
and then I
Y
mostly had
to
to wear
just
it work
having it
weekends,
on
which worked
top.
out because
And
especially
now
on
let's
that
hit
day,
save
because I
and
could
refresh,
bring you
and you
kids
can
there and
see
let
we
you go
have
swimming
now
for the day.
completed our
And then I didn't
design
have to
for our
worry about
website.
didn't
In
have to
less
worry
than
about
half an
having a
hour, we've
babysitter or
managed to
anything.
build a
Came to
incredibly
work with me and you
complex
guys went and had fun for
and
the day.
beautiful website for our Tin Dog startup. I hope our clients will be pleased because we've created this amazing, incredibly modern
That's what I
looking
loved about working
website
at
for
David.
them. And we should be pleased because it only took us so little time to
No,
do by leveraging the
now
power
never
of the
give a.
Bootstrap components and
She didn't
using
care if we
the
had
different
kids
helper
there.
classes, utilities,
She always
as
used to
well
say,
as
you can bring
snippets
kids
that they
in
provide.
weekends if you want.
Hopefully this gives you an insight into how we can
Because then
use
I don't have to
Bootstrap
worry
to
about a
create
babysitter or anything,
beautiful,
and you guys
complex
were old enough
websites quickly.
at
And
that
also,
time
you
when I
see the
started to
difference
bring you
between
to
what
not worry about
CSS Grid,
drowning or
Flexbox,
anything
and
in
Bootstrap
pools
are all good for. They all have
or the hot
different
tub or whatever you
strengths
guys
and
were
weaknesses.
hanging
And
out in
I
at
think
the time,
Bootstrap is
or
really
both.
good for throwing some components down and creating something that looks
But I know
incredibly
you guys
modern
had a
very,
blast.
very quickly. Whereas Flexbox and Grid are great
It's
when
like
you want
other
to get
kids
into.
in the summertime go and have to pay for swimming. You guys got to go for free.
Hey guys, in this module, I've got something a little bit different for you. Now, up till now, we've been working on how to build websites that have
There,
great
I'm moving my
functionality
turns that are
and how to use
hanging on the
CSS,
bottom up.
HTML to build up the
Put them in the
structure
middle
of
on
the
the top.
website. Now,
And put
today,
all the
I
other
want to talk
ones hanging
about
down
something a little bit different, namely how to design websites so that not only does your website have great functionality, but it also looks
Yeah,
beautiful.
aren't
The
they?
most important thing to making a website loved by users is pretty
The one
much
that
the
looks like
design.
a Northern Lights.
After all, think about it. When was the last
Yeah.
time you heard somebody tell you,
And
hey, I came across this great website. It worked
they are
really, really
so
well.
pretty.
So smooth and no
All the
bugs.
different colors.
Nobody
They're
ever
just
says that, right?
gorgeous.
They say things like, it looked so beautiful. It just worked like I wanted it to.
I knew they would
So
be.
today we're going to talk about design, and I want to show you some of the different
I was
aspects
like, oh,
of design
these
when
will
it
go
comes
over
to
well,
websites.
especially when I do
Now,
like
more often than not, you've heard
Cardinal
this saying,
and those
right?
places because
Don't judge
they
a book by
like
its
there's lots of
cover.
natives there.
Now, at the same
So
time, you might have also heard
these
of
will go
this
like
saying,
hotcakes.
you only have 3 seconds to make a good impression. Now, when it comes to web
I
design,
should probably
the
make
latter
some
is
more of
probably
these.
more accurate. It's just like a job interview or a first date.
I went and I
Your
hung them all on
website
the
has
bottom
a
now.
crucial few
Your
seconds
auntie's like,
before
oh,
the user
pretty.
is going to judge your company, your brand, your product. So take a look at this example. This is a website called Penny Juice,
And just
and
telling her, I
it's a
think so
company
too.
that sells children's juice cartons. Now, look at the design of it.
Yeah.
There's clashing
I built all
colors,
those
there's
while I was
different
yapping at you this morning.
typefaces,
Isn't that
there's
amazing?
different colors for the text, and they have different fonts, and it's all, to be honest, a bit of a mess. So
Yeah.
this is a question I often ask students at this point. Take a look at this website and ask
I have
yourself,
these other
if
earrings
you were
that
to
I
buy
made
a
too on
product
these
from this
hoops, but
company, if
I
you were to
know
buy a carton of juice,
I tried
how
to
much
put
would you
a
pay
set of them
for
on
it?
and they just didn't
Now, take a look at this
work
website.
working for me.
This is the same website reimagined by a
Like
professional web
I know
designer.
they're pretty, but
Look at how the
they're
color
just
scheme is now consistent, how the
I don't know.
fonts and the typefaces now look a lot better. And ask yourself again, how much would you pay for a single carton of juice from this website? Now, I've
These
asked
blue
this
ones that I
question
made,
to a
they're
number of
pretty,
people,
but they're
and this
like,
is the result I
I
got.
don't have them
People
on
are
this,
willing
on
to
this
pay
string, but
anywhere up to only $1
it's
for a
like,
carton of juice from the first website,
they're
but
pretty, but
anywhere
they're
up
just,
to $3 for the second website. Now, I run a startup, and a lot of
I
friends
don't
and
know,
colleagues of mine also
hard
work
to
on
put
their own
on. I
businesses.
tried to put them on,
And
I
we
set
usually
on
spend
because
a
there's like
lot of
these little
time
moving things that
brainstorming.
I
How can we make our
made on the
product
one
better?
set,
How can we make our brand stronger?
and
And there's very,
they're
very
gorgeous,
few
but
things that
they
we can
don't
think
seem
of
to want
that can actually produce a 3 times improvement in the value of your
be
product
easy
or in
to
the
put
value of
on,
your
and
company.
I'm worried about that.
So
They're
design
not
is
easy
really,
to
really powerful.
put on,
It's
like
one of the
that's probably gonna
cheapest
put somebody
ways
off
to make your
wanting to wear them,
company or your product look expensive
but you never
because it's
know.
elevating. And it doesn't
Some
take
people
a
are
lot
very
to get good
persistent
at
and want what they
design,
want to wear.
as you'll see in the coming lessons. So we're going to be exploring some of the principles of web design in this module. And I want to take you through everything from color theory to typography
I made
to
them and
user
they're
interface
they are
design
kind of cute.
and
They're
user
just
experience
they're
design.
different because
These
they're
are the
totally round
4
like a
pillars of
round
good
earring,
web design.
Here,
So once you're ready,
hoop,
head over
the
to the
hoop
next
time.
lesson and let's get started.
Like I really like them, but they're kind
Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is color theory. And color
I
theory
just
is
don't
the
know, like,
art
'cause I
and
had problems
science
putting them on. It
of
was like, well, I guess
creating the
maybe
right
I'm
palette
just
for your
different. Maybe
website.
it could be,
So
you know,
take a
somebody
look
will
at this
implement it.
example. Now, let's say you had a logo where you have
And
flowers, which are brown, paintball,
try
which is
and see if they
pink.
want to sell
It looks
too.
all very weird and very inconsistent.
Like the
And
rest of them.
take a look at the actual logos. Like, what are you thinking when you see these color palettes on the
But
words?
you see this little
The
doll
color of the
stand thing.
flowers
It's so
looks
cute.
a
It
bit
just
like
it
dirt,
works
I
for me
guess,
hanging
but
my
it also
jewelry
looks
on.
a bit like something else. And the
Like they display
paintball
it
being
like this,
pink,
so I can
I'm not really sure
get
who
a
their
good look
target
at how they would
audience
hang.
is. But
Yeah.
take a look at this. If we flip the color palette,
Like that
it
one
suddenly
that
all
those
looks
stands
like
that your
it's
auntie
meant to
got
be
me.
like this.
I could
It
do that
suddenly
with this,
all
like
looks
just
a
hang
lot
them all in
better,
there
right?
like that. But
It
then
looks
I don't have
consistent
a
with the
backing
actual
on them,
message.
so that
So
when I
when you're
put them in
picking
the
colors,
package, they're
you
not
have to
finished.
be aware of the
No,
mood of your color palette.
I like
So
having
the
the back, the
predominant
cardboard
color
backing
that is
on them.
going to be in your design really
It keeps
tells a
them
story
safer.
and it conveys a message to the user.
Mm-hmm.
For example, red conveys love, energy,
Yeah.
intensity, which is why you see a lot of car adverts which have a red
Yeah, well, I've
car
been looking
on
at
a
getting,
red
like, I
background.
got a couple
It's because they're
more
trying to
different
tell
ones,
you,
right?
hey, buy this car and you'll
And
feel
I was like,
energetic
well, I'll
and
just keep
the intensity of
looking,
this
and
car,
every once in a while I'll
even if
order
you're
one here and
89.
there.
Now, yellow is more about joy, intellect, attention. And the most important thing about yellow, though, is how attention grabbing it is. Because it's almost
They're gonna
impossible to not look at something
paint the
that is
shed
very
with the
yellow. For
apartment.
example, this ad. Now, a few years back, this ad caused an
Because
uproar
I'm asking her what
because it
color
has
they're
this
gonna paint.
lady in a yellow bikini and it says, "Are you beach body ready?" And a lot of people got really, really upset about it. They took to the internet, they raved about it. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, you know, this is not
Gray.
so different from a lot of the other ads that are
It's
trying to
like the
tell
same
women
as the
how to
building
look.
color, gray.
And it's not a great message. But why is it causing so much anger and causing so much attention drawn to it?
I make those.
And I think the reason is because it's actually bright yellow. It's impossible to ignore this advert when you come across it. So when you're creating a logo or when you're creating some sort of headline, then yeah, yellow is a great choice. But when you're creating something that's designed to be looked at for a long period of time, then yellow can be too attention grabbing. It might actually hurt your user's eyes if you try to read a whole article that's backgrounded in yellow. Now, the next color that we're going to talk about is green, which is all about freshness, growth, safety. And that's why you see a lot of grocery companies like HelloFresh or Amazon Groceries use this color as their predominant color palette because it's trying to tell you, hey, look, this thing is edible. This is what we're selling. And so if you have a company that has anything to do with food, this is usually a safe bet to go with. Now, blue is about stability, trust, serenity. And so you see a lot of companies which need to convey that, hey, we're really trustworthy. Use this color. For example, look at all the financial companies. Look at companies like PayPal or the cryptocurrency companies like Coinbase. They all choose this color because they want you to know that they're not going to run away with your money. In fact, there was a really interesting psychology study where they compared interviewees wearing different colored shirts. So, for example, a group of them would wear a green shirt, another group would wear a blue shirt, and they compared how they were perceived by the interviewers. And it showed that just by changing the color of your shirt to a blue one, you vastly increase the amount of trust in you that's given by other people.
There you go.
So have a think about that the next time you're going for an interview. Now, the final color is purple, and it's meant to signify royalty, wealth, femininity. And strangely enough, I've come across a number of payday loan companies which use this color palette, especially ones which are targeted at women. So the important thing to think about is that you're making a conscious decision when you're choosing a color palette. It's not just whichever color you like or your favorite color, but it's actually what message am I trying to convey to the user, and then picking an appropriate color.
Yep.
Now, usually you're not just going to be using a single color for your design. You're probably going to be using 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah.
So at some point, you have to think about which different colors to combine. And this is probably the most scientific part of color theory. Now, very often, designers will rely on scientific ways of combining colors. For example, taking 2 colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. And this way, you create what's called an analogous color palette. And these designs look incredibly harmonious, and they really work well together. So this color palette can be really good for things like navigation bars and the body of your website, or things like a logo and its background. Now, what it's not so good at, though, is standing out. If you really want your design to pop, you're better off taking 2 colors from opposite ends of the color wheel, creating what's called a complementary color palette or a clashing palette. Now, this complementary color palette really creates that pop, and it really brings out each of the colors. So the next time you go to a supermarket, I want you to take a look at the meat aisle and see if they've used this complementary color palette to make things pop. So one of the things that you often see is they'll take these fake plastic bits of greenery, like fake grass or fake bushes, and they'll put it in between the meat. And because the green and the red are complementary colors, it makes the red meat pop out a lot more and gives you this idea of freshness, even if it's a little bit past the best stage. But what you shouldn't do with clashing colors or complementary colors is to try to style text and text background with it, because it actually looks very, very jarring, and you can feel your eyes sort of getting a little bit fuzzy looking at this particular combination. So don't do this when it concerns text. Instead, keep it to things like logos or icons or things that you really, really want to stand out from each other. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you can combine colors, like drawing an equilateral triangle to create a triadic color palette, or drawing a perfect square. Now, if you want to, you can head over to a website called Adobe Color, which lets you mess around with all of these different color combinations. So select a triadic color palette or a square color palette, and then drag it around the color wheel so that you get different combinations of colors. And once you come across a palette that fits the mood of your project, then you can pick the hex codes and just put them straight into your website.
You even get to see who moved out.
Now, if all of that sounded like it was a little bit too much work, then I got you covered. You can also use a website called colorhunt.co. This is a website where professional designers have curated some of their favorite color palettes, and you can nab the hex codes straight off the website. So take a look at the hot and popular sections of this website and use it to guide the palette scheme for your next project. Now, when you create a website that has a beautiful, consistent color scheme, like the one for the Liebe yogurt, you can see how much it makes the design stand out, and it becomes really colorful and really playful, and you can convey different messages using your choice of colors and your color scheme. So think about your color choice and your color palette the next time you design your website to make sure that it's consistent with what your brand is about and what your product is about, and it conveys the message you want to convey.
Yeah. I think that all the time.
Right, the next topic I want to talk about is typography. Now, I know a lot of students always say to me, but why do I need to learn about typography? I just open up Word, click the drop down, find Times New Roman, my favorite font, and then just put that on everything. It's done, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's think about this.
Well,
let's say it's Valentine's Day, and you decide that you want to write a letter to your beloved Valentine, and you change the font to something cursive like this. You'll always be mine. I don't know if she or he will be, but you have a good chance. Now, let's say that you chose the wrong font. That's a bit of a problem. Not only do I not think your Valentine is going to take very kindly to this, you might also have the police on your back, which is a bit of a problem. So fonts really do matter, and it's important to consider not only their mood, but also how to combine different fonts, and it's a really, really easy way to make your designs look very professional and really slick. Out of all of the fonts in the world, there's pretty much two large families that you should really know about. One is the serif family, where they have these little feet at the end of their central beams. And the reason why they have these little feet is because the serif typeface were inspired by the marble carvings of days of yore. So if you next go out and you take a look at the buildings around you, especially if you're in a historical area, take a look at places where they've carved into stone or marble. And you'll notice that they also have these little feet at the end of the central beams. So why is that? I don't know how many of you carve marble in your spare time, but if you did, you would know that once your chisel has gone into the rock and you need to exit your engraving, it's actually not possible to create 90-degree angles when you're carving into rock. So this is where the serif typeface gets their inspiration from. And this is also the reason why when you're choosing a serif typeface, you're making your design look more serious, more authoritative, and also a little bit older as well. So it's really good if you're designing something like a letterhead for a legal company or a magazine for architectural design. But when we take a look at the big family of serif typefaces, they're actually further subdivided into smaller subfamilies like old style, transitional, modern, and slab serif. Now, the really interesting thing is you can actually tell how old a typeface would look by looking at the difference between the thickest and the thinnest parts of each letter. So compare the old style O versus the transitional O versus the modern O, and look at how that difference between the thickest part of the letter and the thinnest part gets more and more exaggerated as you get towards a more modern font. So if you want something that looks authoritative but modern, then maybe you want to go for a modern serif typeface like Didot. But if you wanted to come across as a little bit older, a little bit more aged, maybe you have a winery, maybe you want to go for an old style serif instead. Now, just as different colors have different moods and emotions, different fonts also have different moods, and they also convey a different message to a user, depending on which one you choose.
So the serif family generally come across as traditional, stable, respectable, authoritative. These are the words that get thrown around by designers when they're thinking about the serif typeface. So, for example, the next time you go to a magazine rack, pick up the Vogue magazine, take a look at their title, and see how it's a modern serif typeface. It's got hugely exaggerated difference between the thick and thin parts of the lettering, and it looks authoritative and it knows what it's talking about. Now, on the other hand, if we think about the sans serifs, they're kind of a different family, because instead of having the serifs or the little feet at the end of the central beams, they have perfect right angles. And it's this right angle that makes the sans serif family look so much more friendly, more approachable, more novel, and more contemporary. So, for example, you will tend to get words like sensible, simple, straightforward. And this is why a lot of startups love using the sans serif typeface in their websites. For example, a humanist typeface, which is a subfamily of the sans serifs, is something that is known as a highly readable typeface. And in fact, even within the serif and the sans serifs, you'll tend to see designers going for the sans serifs if they want to write body text, which needs to be more legible and more readable. Now, within this subfamily, there's even differences in terms of legibility and readability. So how easy are the words to read, and how pleasant is it to read the letters? There was a really interesting study done by MIT a few years back where they took two groups of users. One, they put them into a car which had a dashboard made of a humanist typeface. And the other car had a dashboard which had a grotesque sans serif typeface. And what they did is they tracked the pupils of the people who were driving the cars. And they tested how long each driver needed to look down at the dashboard before they got enough information from the speedometer or the odometer, and before they could come back and look at the road again. And really surprisingly, they found that just by changing the font from a grotesque sans serif to a humanist sans serif, they could save the drivers somewhere around 30 to 40% of the time that's required to understand the information. So imagine that car is on a freeway that's driving at 60 miles, 100 miles an hour. That difference in the amount of time the user needs to look down at the dashboard could be the difference between life and death. And as designers, we rarely get to make that kind of difference in the world, right? So knowing that the humanist typeface, all of the fonts that belong in that category, like Jill Sans, Tahoma, Vedana, these are highly readable and highly legible fonts, which you can use in the body text, for example, of your sales pitch. Now, even though we're not saving lives with our sales pitches, if you manage to get the user to read through more of your sales copy, then they're probably going to be more convinced and more likely to buy your product, right? So readability and legibility when you're choosing fonts is incredibly important. And the things that you're looking for in the letters when you're looking for legibility are open shapes and a lot of space between each of the letters. And also the forms look unambiguous and they look different. For example, here the G and the 9 actually look different on the second line. And finally, varying proportions. So having an O that's very wide and a 0 that's a bit more narrow, so you can actually tell the difference between the two. Now, while we've talked about using fonts, it's often that you see people go a bit overboard, where they choose 10 fonts in the same design. And that makes your design look very cluttered and very unprofessional. I recommend actually sticking to just 2 fonts in one design. So if you're making a poster, keeping that to 2 fonts. If you're making a section of your website, keeping that again to 2 fonts. It just looks a lot cleaner and a lot tighter. And when you're combining these 2 different fonts, you want to try to go for similar moods. So find fonts that have a similar mood to each other and also a similar time era. You don't want something that looks ultra modern with something that looks like it's from the days of yore combined together. It looks a little bit weird. Now, the things you want to contrast are the serifness. So, for example, you want the heading to be a serif and the body to be a sans serif, or the opposite way round. It just creates more interest in your design. And similarly, you can also create interest by just changing up the weights between the heading and the body. So making the heading really, really bold, or even using a black typeface, and making the body text using something like thin or regular or light. These different weights can create contrast in your design. Now, if you don't remember anything from this talk on typefaces, I just want you to look at these 6 fonts and try to wipe them from your memory, because it is very, very difficult to make these designs look good. Unless, I guess, if you're running a lemonade stand. But if you want to look professional, if you want to look designed, try to use one of the other fonts that we've talked about and try to ignore these ones which are difficult to read and have moods that are difficult to fit in a professional setting. The next time you're designing a website, think about what typefaces you're going to choose. Think about what you're trying to convey with those typefaces, and then pick a font from the sans serif or the serif family. And maybe try to combine them. So you have a heading that's a sans serif and a body that's a serif, and try to create contrast in your designs. So keep this in mind, and hopefully that will make your designs a lot more interesting and a lot more professional. So now that we've talked about some of the fundamentals of design, like color theory and typography, the next thing I want to talk about is user interface design. Now, take a look at this picture. In most cases, 99% of you would have read "your eyes here" first, then here, then "isn't that fascinating?" So this is just a way that our brains work. We're always drawn to the bigger, bolder, squarer things. And as designers, we can use this knowledge to define hierarchy. So let's say that you were to write a birthday invite to Jane. You could write it like this, but all of the information has equal weighting. So as a reader, I have to go through the entire paragraph, and I can't just skim through it to get the important bits. So it's going to take me a lot longer, right? Now, on the other hand, if I apply the rules of hierarchy, then the most important information gets conveyed over first, and I make sure that Jane actually knows whose birthday party it is, where it is, and when they should go. So we can establish hierarchy in a number of ways. The most obvious is through the use of color. So colors that really pop and stand out and have contrast with their background tend to be used for high hierarchy. So, for example, in this case, if all the colors were the same, then it feels like they all have equal importance. But on the other hand, if we have something that's very bright, very standout-ish, versus something that's a bit more grayed, a bit more muted, then we know exactly where our eyes will go to first. Now, if you take a look at this example, this is the ASOS website, and their predominant color palette is this sort of gray and white color. But they've really cleverly used their accent tone, this green and red, to really tell the user what they think you should really look at. And it seems like ASOS really cares that you know that they have an outlet, and also that you add your product to the bag so that they can actually make money off you. So in this case, they're using that green accent tone to really pull the eyes to that button and make sure that the user actually completes their transaction. Now, in addition to color, you should also think about size, because as I said, the bigger items often draw your eyes to it. So, for example, if you look at the Coinbase website, which you can use to buy cryptocurrency, you can see the first thing they want to tell you is you can use this website to buy and sell cryptocurrency. Now, the next biggest thing on the page is this huge email input and a button that says Get Started. So, because a lot of these companies run ads and they're paying for users to land on their page, it's really important for them to capture the emails. This is kind of what this design is representing, right? As long as you land on this page, you're probably going to want to look at this place where you put in your email address and get started, so that the company can capture your information. Now, in addition to establishing hierarchy, in terms of user interface, you should think about the layout of your website. You can, of course, on one hand, have this big block of text, which is just your website, where everything is all laid out in the same kind of way, or you can create more interest by creating a block of text and then interspersed with pictures, and then create some different sizes and different shapes and different hierarchies to make your design look more interesting.
Nobody to blame but myself.
Now, the Wikipedia pages are an example in bad design, because just look at how bland it looks. It really is trying to be an encyclopedia, but it doesn't have to be like this. Now, one of the most noticeable things about Wikipedia is just the length of each block of text. Just look at how long each line of text is. It's very hard for a user to keep their eyes tracking along the same line. And in fact, in terms of user interface design, there's an optimal line length. Too long and it gets a little bit tedious to read, but too short feels a bit too choppy and it's a bit awkward to read. So you want to aim for something around 40 to 60 characters per line so that it feels comfortable to the user and they'll be able to get through the information and still be interested in your website. Now, when you have good layout like Grammarly's website, it's not only interesting, but it also chops up the content into smaller pieces so that you actually get through more of the website and you take more of it in. Now, another thing I want to talk about is alignment. This is to do with how you position each of the elements on the screen relative to each other. So take a look at the example on the left. The top title is center aligned, whereas the body text is left aligned. And it makes it look a little bit awkward, like they're not really meant to be together. Now on the right, however, just by shifting the alignment so that both starting points are the same for the title and the body, it suddenly looks a lot more consistent and a lot more designed. Now, one of the easiest ways of making any sort of design you create look professional is just to reduce the number of alignment points. So let's say that you're creating a slide deck for your next presentation, or you're creating a poster for your birthday party. Take a look at all the things that are on the design and identify a line which goes through the beginning of each item. Now, if you can reduce the number of lines, like we have done here on the right, then suddenly the design looks a lot more coherent, like all the pieces are meant to be together, and it just looks a lot more professional. So use these grid lines in your design to help you. Visualize where the starting points of each element is and try to line them all up. Because even if you do nothing else but just alignment, you can see in this case the left looks a lot more sloppy and the right looks a lot more designed and more professional. And all that's changed. There's no change in the color, there's no change in the typography, it's just the alignment. Now, a really important concept in all design is white space. And white space refers to the empty space that's around text or around your elements. Now, sometimes when I'm on the high street, I come across one of these luxury handbag or shoe shops, and I look through the window. Now, here's an experiment. Take a look at this shop that sells handbags and take a look at this one. Now, how much are you willing to pay for a handbag from this shop versus this one? Now, this is really a use case for white space. A lot of luxury shops, luxury designer stores, one of their simplest tools is just injecting white space around their products, space things out, and it makes everything suddenly look a lot more expensive. Whereas when you have everything all tightly crammed together and you have a lot of product on show, it makes it look like it's some sort of discount store. And this same principle applies when it comes to digital design as well. Let's say you have an ad for noise-cancelling headphones. If you have loads of things on screen, there's new, only $20, 100% noise cancellation, it makes the product look really cheap. Whereas if you injected some white space, all of a sudden it looks like Apple made it, right? Just by adding that space around each element on the screen, you can make your design a lot more minimalist and at the same time elevate it. Now, the last thing on user interface design I want to talk about, and probably the most important, is design for your audience. A lot of things that I've said, including not using Comic Sans, it really depends on your audience. Let's say you're designing a children's concert poster. The one on the right looks like something that children might actually want to go to. The one on the left looks a bit like a funeral advertisement. It's so serious, it's so black and white, and it's so severe looking that no child is going to want to go to that concert. So think about your audience. Think about what would appeal to them and what's important to convey to them. That it's going to be a fun concert, or that it's going to be boring adults who are going to be reading newspapers and there's some sort of classical band in the background. When you're designing websites, design it for your audience. Even if it's something a little bit messier, a little bit bolder in terms of color, as long as it fits your audience, then that's perfectly fine. So have the flexibility in your design so that you're not just creating one style all the time. You're creating one style for a particular audience, like teenagers who want to buy clothes, and you're creating a different style for people who want to buy and sell cryptocurrency or have a medical website. So the flexibility in your design skills is really important when it comes to user interface design. But keep in mind those 5 things: hierarchy, layout, alignment, white space, and your audience. And you'll be well onto the way to creating more beautiful user interfaces for your websites.
That's the only way I can describe it, because that's what you
Now, so far, we've talked about the 3 pillars of web design: color theory, typography, user interface design, and now I want to talk about the last pillar, user experience design. Now, a lot of people often get confused about what exactly is UX, or user experience. And one of the best ways I've heard it explained is through the story of the renovation of a college. So this is a picture of Reed College in the US, and let's just use it as our imaginary backdrop. So this college decided that it needed to undergo serious renovation, tearing down the buildings, building new ones, and completely reform the campus. So they invited this well-known architect who was very respected in his field. He came and he did a great job with all the buildings, and the provost was really, really happy. Was like, this looks great. But he had one question. Hey, Mr. Architect, it seems like you've just left lawn across the entire campus. Where are all the paths that people are going to walk on to get between the buildings? At this point, the architect says, don't worry, I'll come back in a year and all will be revealed. So in a year, the paths where people need to naturally walk becomes trodden down and the grass gets worn down, revealing these paths that people need. And it's at this point when the architect actually lays down all the tiles and paves these paths. So this is kind of the difference between user experience and design. Design, we often think of having an aesthetic, what we think looks good, and enforcing that on the user. Now, user experience is meant to be invisible. If you have a good experience with a website, it's meant to be unobtrusive, and it just lets you do your thing. And it feels like as if everything is easy and everything is effortless. So this is what we're aiming for. And in order to do that, we have to think about, again, 5 things. The first is simplicity. Keeping things simple is always better than making it more complex or more cluttered. So this is a website called CNET, and it's one of the biggest news websites in China. Now, every time I look at it, though, I get a headache because it is just so dense. There are so many links, and my brain gets overwhelmed and I say, nope, I can't do it. So take a look at this alternative. This is Monocle. which is also a news website.
There
But look
is
at how they've managed to
that
chop
one
up
in
the
that middle
content,
cupboard that
provide some
Dan,
interest
that
for the
was in the
eyes.
bunkhouse.
There's a little bit of dialogue, some images,
there,
some
that was
videos,
top
a little bit of text. It's never
And then there
overwhelming.
was another
And with that
countertop,
consistent color scheme and
countertop thing that was
typography,
on
it's really delightful to
the
actually
bottom,
read,
and
rather than this experience of sort
the
of
stove was in a
hurting your
different spot. I
eyes
think it
with
was
design.
more like
This is a much
around the
nicer
corner kind of a
user
little bit,
experience
because
because it's
in the
simple.
very
So
corner
whenever you're
there
having to
was
choose, should I make it more
the
complex or
water
should I
barrel
make it more simple,
for in
always
that
try
for
to
the
pare
house.
it down.
So I
The
remember we
second
had to
point
pack
is
snow in when we were
consistency.
kids and fill that
Keep your
barrel
designs
all the time.
consistent,
Yeah,
but
so we
also
had
keep
fresh
the
water going down all
functionality
the time.
of your product
Right there.
consistent. So here's an example. This is
We
the
had to
web page
tap
for
water
Xfinity.
anytime we could get water
Xfinity is
for
a really
anything,
big
and
communications
rainwater
company in the
was
US.
automatically we would
And
build it
they
from
are
outside
responsible
into
for
that
various
barrel.
things like providing TV and providing internet. Here are 3 screenshots from various parts of their website.
Yeah.
One is their homepage,
I
the
can't believe I
second
grew up
is
on
their TV
drinking
offerings, and the last
rainwater
one
and
is their news
washing
site.
our clothes and
And
everything
if you
in
take a look
rainwater.
at the top
And then in the
navigation
summertime
bar,
we go to the
not
river and get
only
water.
do you see that they've changed up the design of the
But we
navigation
didn't
bar
have lids for them
between
like
the
they do
different
now.
parts
We
of their
had lids for
website,
them. We wouldn't
they
move so
also
much.
made it work
They
a
those
little
big
bit
tanks like
differently.
those
The
ones
buttons
that
are
I
not all in the
had,
same
those
place. The
oval
search
ones
bar
we used
moves
for the
around.
horses.
And that inconsistency means that
Yeah.
a user is going to be confused when they go from one part of the website to another,
Yeah, so I
having to
had those then,
relearn how to use your
but
website.
then
If you
something.
think about the target audience of this company, Xfinity, a lot of them
Because
are
I
going to
had
be a
all the
little bit
water for the
older,
horses
right?
down at the farm
And having
too.
this inconsistent functionality and inconsistent design will really make those users have a bad experience with this website. Now, the next thing to think about when you're designing your
Yeah,
website is to take into account
because we
people's
didn't have a
reading
dugout
patterns.
down there, and that's
Now,
what we
they've
need for
looked at how
to be
human
able to
eyes
water.
track a web
But
page
your
and
dad
which
and I were
parts they
thinking
look
of
at when they're browsing.
redrilling
And
that
one of the
hole
most
where the old
common
dugout
reading
was, where
patterns
that
is
old
what's
house
called
was there.
the F pattern,
We
where
just
the eye
redrilled the hole
starts
down
at the
and
top
use it,
left of the
like
corner,
put a cistern
and
in
then
there,
it
like
tracks to
what
the right,
you guys,
and then
we
it
had,
flips back
you
again,
and John did at
browsing
the
down
farm.
the left gutter. So you have often things like bullet
And
points
then
or pictures or icons, buttons, they're all on the left. So you can design for this by using the F layout. So have the
yeah,
most
and close
important
by, so
parts of
you
your
could use it
content on
for
the left
the
gutter.
household.
Have the logo at the top and have everything follow this pattern.
Yeah,
For example, like this website for
yeah.
BigCommerce.
Well, at
See
least
how
with
the
one place
eye
having
is
water, you
being
can all
naturally
get go there and have a
accommodated going
shower.
from left to right. Now, another really common
Like
pattern
when
for
Rain
reading
and I
is the Z pattern,
had
where
that
I
set up
go
with the
from
big
left
water
to right
barrel in
and
the
then
bunkhouse,
zigzagging
and
down
then
all
into
the way
the,
the website. Now,
even though
this
I
of course
destroyed
depends
my
on the type
fucking
of website. So
bunkhouse,
if you have
you
something
didn't
that's
have
more
to do that.
sparse with more video content, or if somebody's trying to browse a website a little bit
I was
faster,
so fucking
you
mad
see
at
them
him when
using
I
this
came home
layout.
and seen that afterwards.
And
I
this
was
layout
like,
is
what the
used pretty
fuck did you
famously
just do?
in the Facebook website, using that Z pattern to
Fucking
accommodate for
total.
people's natural reading pattern. So
Oh,
have a think about this. Have a think about how people naturally look at the page and
and
place
it's
your
like, you
content in
destroyed
that
my
pattern
fucking
to make it
bunkhouse.
easier for people who are
I just
using your
told you to
website.
open up this little section
Now,
here
in
because it used
today's
to
day and
be,
age,
it
it's
could have
really
been a
important to
doorway
think
or
about
something at
all
one time,
platform
and it's
design.
fucking open it up
It's
here.
not enough anymore
But
to
not where
just
the fuck
design a
that
website
hide.
that's meant to
Oh,
go
I was
onto a
so livid
desktop
when I found out what
computer.
he did.
Instead, you have to think
Oh, did I
about
keep the trailer
mobile
for
as
when
well.
it'll be
So
warm, because
having a
it'll be
website that
insulated,
scales
and
up nicely onto
there was
mobile,
tape.
what we call mobile responsive,
You
is
know,
really important. You don't want a big website that's
oh,
designed to take up a
yeah. That's why I
landscape
said
kind of
there's all those
screen to be
moments when I,
crammed
you know,
into
you
a
just want
phone
to kick
that's
somebody in the
actually
fucking
more like a
balls
portrait shape.
so bad.
This looks really bad and it's very hard
You
to
know, after
read
all
the
this
individual
time, I
links,
still want
and
to
more often than
fucking
not,
every time I
my
think
finger's
about
actually
those
too
shit
big to
things,
tap
I was
onto the
like,
link
oh,
that I
kick my
want.
balls.
So this is a really bad
Oh, I'm
user
so fucking
experience.
glad I'm rid of that.
Now, this can
Oh,
happen the opposite way as well. So a design that looks much better on mobile, but then when it's rendered on a desktop with a
it
wide
really
kind of
is.
screen, it doesn't use up enough of the screen
Yeah,
real estate.
it really,
For
really
example,
is.
this is the Facebook's latest
I'm glad that's
redesign of
just
their
gone.
website. And you've got all of this empty
But
space that's not being used at all, and everything's
and
crammed into
I'm
the
where I'm
middle.
at now.
This is
I'm
not
very
very
thankful.
efficient.
Yeah.
So have a think about how you're
And I
using the
have a
available
great
space,
relationship with
and
my
make sure that your
daughter
website
and my
rearranges
son-in-law now
itself
because we
when
how
it's
good
being
that
rendered
asshole.
on a portrait smaller screen versus a larger desktop screen.
Exactly.
And try to avoid one of my pet peeves in terms of design, which is having so many banners on your website that show up on the mobile version that your content becomes impossibly small. And even when you're scrolling, it's like you're scrolling it on an Apple Watch or something. Whereas all of this extra content is taken up by warnings and banners and cookies, and it's just not a very good user experience. But on the other hand, don't go crazy either. Don't make your entire website just one part, like a picture or a piece of text. Scaling it up massively like this is also very, very awkward, because then I have to just keep scrolling until forever before I can actually read and take in all of the content. So strike a happy medium, and most importantly, test. Give it to other users. You can employ professional testers to try out your website and give you feedback. Now, if you can't afford that, just use your family and friends and bake some cookies for them, get them to test out your website, and start getting some feedback on how you can improve the design. Now, finally, we've talked a lot about user experience and how to get people to have a good time. Now, some designers, though, use the knowledge they have about human psychology and user interface and user experience design to do bad things.
Okay, so it might take
And
3 or
in the
2 or
design
3
world, we
charges,
call
but
these
by the
dark
time they get
patterns.
done that, the whole yard will
So
look
patterns
gorgeous.
which get a user to perform
all
an
that tall
action or
grass will be
behavior that is beneficial to the company or the designer, but it's not necessarily what the user wants. And this, I would say, is another form of bad user experience. So let me give you some examples. This is a real life example. Let's say that you walked into Waitrose, which is a big supermarket in the UK, and you bought yourself a sandwich. Now, when you look at it, at the point when you're buying it, it looks like this sandwich is going to be full length from edge to edge, right? But then when you rip open the packaging, you're disappointed when you find that actually all that's in the middle is just air, and your sandwich turns out to be a lot smaller than you initially thought. It is the worst feeling in the world. This is a feeling that I can't stand when my food suddenly gets reduced in size. It's like as if somebody came along and took food out of your plate. In the digital world, people do the same thing, the same kind of trickery that's meant to get you to perform an action that you don't necessarily want, and you end up feeling really disappointed and really upset. With Amazon, every single time I have to re-click the free delivery button, which I've earned by buying so much product from them. But they still try to trick you using the things that we've learned about hierarchy, for example. Here, the button that makes them more money, Express Delivery, is highlighted in orange. It pops out a lot more. It's a lot more likely that you'll want to click on it. But in all likelihood, you were probably happy with just normal delivery, and you're now tricked into paying more for this delivery. Now, here's another example that's actually truly evil. This is a Snapchat ad for some shoes. But what the designer has cleverly done on the advertising is they've placed a 1 pixel curved line on this ad, which makes it kind of look a bit like a hair is on your screen. But when you go onto that screen and you try to get rid of that piece of hair, well, you've tapped on it, haven't you? So the ad takes you to the website, and the advertisers make money off each click. And this is truly a dark pattern, because it's just tricking you to do something you didn't want to. Whereas good design is about helping people do what they want to do and giving them a good experience while they're at it. Now, the king of dark patterns is Ryanair. It's a low-cost airline in Europe, which is really known for sort of charging you for every single little thing. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they suddenly charged you for using the toilet on the plane. But here's what the website looks like when you try to buy an airplane ticket.
I don't know if I killed it or not.
In order to buy your airplane ticket, you have to go through all of these extra add-ons, including saying, no, I don't want to buy travel insurance. But look at how they've hidden it inside this big drop-down list. And it's not even at the beginning of the list. It's actually sorted alphabetically below Denmark for some reason. And this just makes it so much harder for you to find that option and for you to actually accidentally end up buying travel insurance. Now, the final example, and probably one of the dark patterns that I dislike the most, is these checkboxes You know, right below you filled in a
Yes,
form, you get these check
That's why I
boxes.
was looking
And
into
sometimes
it.
the
I was like,
wording
okay,
is so confusing,
I
and I
got
really don't
things
know what
to
I'm
build
signing up
those
for.
though.
Like this one. If you would
It's
like
gotta
us to
dig our
no
own hole
longer
and
continue to
have that
stop,
truck
not
and
sending you
put them
special
in there
deals
and
and
then have the
offers
truck
every
come and
week,
build them.
please indicate you are inclined to yes
I
by
just need
not
your help
checking
with
the
Jamie's
box.
help with that.
I
and
have
then
no
I thought,
idea
well, if I
what
had moved
clicking
the
that
house
box
over, I
does.
just move
I
it
really
straight over
just,
onto that.
I
And
don't
then
know. I might click it,
hook
might
up to
not.
the
I don't know what
other
it does.
sewer
But
and
it's
gas on the
horribly
other property
confusing
with the
and it's
house,
not a
right?
good user experience at all. I will bet you that after I
Yeah.
sign up, I'm never going to come back to
Even though
this
everybody
website
was
again.
like, I
Right?
hear it, I was like,
Are you with
well,
me?
try and build a house like
Now,
this
we've
today.
seen what good websites look
You know,
like.
even
We've
as
seen
small
what
as it
bad
is, try and
websites
build
look
a new
like.
house
We've
like this
even
without
seen what
with
evil
how
websites
the
look like.
house is built.
But it's time to put our knowledge
Like I
to
know
the
the
test
you
by
know
designing
the
our
weak
own
part is the
website from
kitchen
scratch
over there,
and
but
applying these
that
4
can be
pillars of
beefed
web
up. Whereas
design
like
to this
if I
project.
had some proper help, I'd
So
be under
have a think
there.
about
I'd
what
be
you've learned
putting
so far
those 2 by 8s
and
in
head over to the
underneath
next
there, those
lesson
ones I
where we're
bought,
going to design a hotel website from
and
scratch.
that would definitely beef up this floor. And attach them side by side right to them 6 by 6s that are 1 by or 2 by
Now that
6s
we've
that are
learned
there,
about some of the principles of web design,
and do the whole
such
rest
as
of it
color
all in that
theory,
the 2 by 8s,
typography,
but then
user
I'd have to
interface design,
reposition
and
all the
user
beams
experience
underneath for
design, the 4 pillars,
holding the floor
it's
up.
time to apply what we've learned and
Mind you, they cut
build a
most of
design
that
together.
one out anyway, or the
Now,
last bit
there's a
of it,
website called Daily
under the
UI,
stairwell
which
there.
gives you a task to design every day for 100 days.
And
It's
I
free to
like
sign
when
up,
I seen
and
that,
it's
I was like,
something that really
why
does
would you do
improve
this, right?
designer skills by just that repeated practice. Now, if you take a look at a website called Collect UI, you can see they've collected
I
together
remember I was
all the
gonna get an
designers'
outdoor
attempts
entrance put
at
in from
designing
that
each of these
side into
daily
the basement,
challenges.
but then
And you can see
where that
examples what
weird
each of
wall
these
is.
challenges are. For example,
But I forgot the
anything
gas
from
line
creating a
comes in
sign up
right there,
screen to a
somewhere
flight
along in
website
there, and
to
then
a
comes up into
hotel
the house.
booking
So
website.
because
So
I had
we're
that
going to
call
take
before you
some of
did
these
come
ideas as inspiration and
find that
create
for me and
our
find out
own
where all the
website
lines
design,
were, because
applying the
when I
4
was
pillars that
building the
we've
fence, I
learned
was gonna
in this
make sure that
module.
I wasn't gonna
The first thing I want
put
you to
something where
do
it
is
should
head
be.
over to a website called canva.com.
Yeah,
Now, this
make
is
sure I
an
put the posts
online
in on
graphics
either side of
editing
that so
program,
that
and you don't have to
the gas
download
line was in
anything,
the
and
middle
it's
of 2
completely
posts.
free to sign up. So sign up for a new
So I didn't
account
never have
and
a
then
chance
go
to
ahead
get
and create
punctured, right?
a new design. So we're going to pick custom dimensions, and I'm going to choose
Be careful.
1400 pixels
That's
by
why you
800
call
pixels
before
high.
you dig,
Once we're inside our design, we're going to take this as the first
especially in
screen
town.
that the user sees in our website. And then when they scroll down, they'll see the next page, and then they scroll down and
That's
see
what
the
I
final
did
part of our website. So let's
before I
design the
even put the
first
fence up. I
title
called them
screen.
and made sure
Now, I'm
before
going
I
to
started
choose
putting the fence
this
up.
free template, which
Yeah,
gives me a backdrop already,
because I
but
wanted to
I'm
make
actually just
sure I
going to
did it
use it for
all
some
the right way
texture.
without having
I quite
problems. Because I
like the
know
way that this
Glenn,
pattern
you were
looks,
saying about
so I'm going to apply the
living in
pattern,
town sucks
and then I'm
because
going
you
to
can't
change the
do what you want
background.
to do to your place because
Now,
you
I
gotta
think the
follow the
background looks a
rules
little
and
bit
your ways,
bland
and you
with
can't,
just a single color.
you
So
know,
I'm going to choose a photo
everything's a
instead.
permit. You gotta pay
And
for it,
I'm going to
and
search for a
sometimes you
beach
pay for the permit and you don't get it, and
like
you
this
don't
one.
get your money back either.
So now that I've got my image, I'm going to drag it out so that it's sized as large as it needs to be. So going all the
Yeah,
way to each of the edges.
but they
And
don't.
then I'm going to reposition it
Yeah.
so that it fills up the entire screen, like
Oh,
this.
I've heard of people
So
paying
now
over
I have a
5 grand
background image, some sort of texture
or
on it,
more,
and I can go to
depending
the
on, I guess
elements
depends
to
on what
keep
the
adding to
cost
this
of the
design.
property and all that
Let's
is,
take
but
a look at
I've
some
heard
of
a
the
lot more.
gradients here. And I'm going to pick something that will fit in with this theme. Now, of course, how you design this is completely up to you. And I'm just providing an example of how I go through this process of designing.
Yeah,
So now I've got a circle here. I'm
yeah.
going to
Well,
add
I
some
don't need
more
somebody
shapes,
coming in here and
maybe
telling me
a
I gotta tear it
square
down
of some
because we're,
sort.
I'm not allowed to build that.
We can click on see all to see all the other ones.
Oh, well,
And then I'm going to put a square, which I'm going to
yeah,
make it
exactly. That's what I
so
said.
that
Yeah,
it goes right to the
there's so
end
many
of
fucking
each of the
conditions
sides.
and
So
things you
here,
gotta do,
and then
and
we're
they
going to
don't
make it
like
line
you
up with
or
the
they don't
center of
want
the circle,
that.
roughly,
That you don't get it.
like this. And let's just change that color to white. Now we
Because
have
they
this
have
nice
control.
white border, some abstract shapes and patterns, and an image. Now I'm going to add a heading text. This heading text is going to be the name of our hotel. After all, we're designing a website
That's
for
why
this
you don't.
unknown
And it's like
hotel,
when you said, "Well,
which
I'm
I'll
moving out
call
because I
a
can't take
hotel.
this anymore,"
A really
and I was
easy
like,
way
"Yeah,
of
I
making
don't blame
something
you."
look authoritative authoritative and like it's been around forever. is by changing the typeface to a serif typeface. So I'm going to highlight this font and I'm going to click the drop down and find a serif typeface like this one, Cardo.
Yeah.
And notice how instantly our hotel looks a lot more established, like it's been around for longer.
Fucking rules.
Now I'm going to change the color of this also to white. So notice how we're starting to establish a color palette of greens and turquoise and blue and white. And we're going to increase the font size to maybe something really large, like 120 or 144.
Yeah, stick their nose in where.
And I'm going to change this so that it's all caps, like so. So that's actually a little bit too big, so let's drop it down a notch. And I can increase the spacing of the letters to, again, make it look more fancy, more expensive, and more authoritative. Here's the name of our hotel, a hotel centered in this box. And now I'm ready to add a subheading. And my subheading is going to be some sort of tagline, right? And I'm going to go with something really obnoxious, like lose yourself to find yourself. I feel like I'm ready to open a hotel tomorrow.
That's one thing I liked about
Let's now contrast this serif typeface for the title with a sans serif sort of body or subtitle. And this is what we learned about in the typography section. It creates contrast in the design. So I'm going to pick this glacial indifference typeface. And I'm again going to choose white. And then make both these lines left aligned so that I can align them to the same position. And notice how when you drag elements around on Canva, it automatically gives you these alignment grids so that you can more easily position it so that they are actually all aligned together. And notice how big a difference that looks, just having it off alignment and then on alignment. It suddenly just looks a lot more proper, right? Now I'm more or less done with my title page. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is going to be a page for selling the features of the hotel. Let's start off by adding some images.
It is what it is.
And I've got some that I've already found before. I've got a picture of a bedroom, which I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, like so. And then I've got a picture of a breakfast of some sort. So you've got food at this hotel. You're not going to starve. That's pretty important for people to know. And I'm going to size it so that it's actually the same size as the other one. So I'm just going to put it on top. Now, the last one is going to be a pool. So you've also got a pool, so you don't get bored. If it gets too hot, you can always just go into the pool. This is turning out to be a great hotel, by the way. I really want to stay here. Now, the goal of our features page is to have 3 images, which are probably going to be about the same size. So I'm actually going to need to crop this last photo so that I get rid of maybe a little bit of this right edge, but have it just about the same size as my other photos. And now I need to resize each of these photos so that it actually can fit onto this page. So I'm just going to throw them one on top of the other and resize them so they're all the same size. And now I can place them around this web page. So when you move towards the edge of each page, you can see this grid show up. So I'm going to line up the left with the left side of the grid, the right with the right side of the grid, and the middle right in the middle. So now these 3 are evenly spaced apart, and I can now add some more design features to it because it's looking a little bit bland just as photos. Now, one of the easiest things to make photos look nice is to just jazz it up with a frame. Now, because our hotel is very modern, it's contemporary, it's been featured in Vogue, I want to make sure that the framing also looks equally contemporary. So I'm going to find a circle. And I'm going to put the circle around this square image, which is going to make it look quite nice and contemporary. And then I'm going to give it a background color like that. And we've now framed our picture. So now all I have to do is just copy it and put it onto all the other images like so. And now I've got 3 features. You've got a bed, you've got food, you've got pool. What more do you want? The next part is probably going to be some sort of explainer, right? So I'll add a subheading of these sections. And the subheading is going to be something like, you get beautiful food, you have beautiful rooms, and you have a beautiful pool. So 3 things that we've got. And I'm going to left align each of these again so that I can make it aligned with the left edge of each of the pictures, like this.
Yeah.
So all three of these pieces of text are on the same horizontal
Like I
level,
said, I'm
and they're
looking forward to
also
our
vertically
countdown
aligned with the start
thing
of
because
each
I'm-
image.
oh,
Now, each of these will need to be
Mhm.
designed so that they have the
I
same
can't wait to go, 'cause
typeface
I was like,
as what we
wow,
had
we're
on the
at,
title
like,
page, so that it's
it's been
consistent,
a
right?
while since I've been down in
Reflecting
that
the
area,
same
and
thing that we
like I
saw
said,
before.
it's so gorgeous
So I'm
there.
going to change that again to glacial indifference and do the same for
I
all
love that
three
area.
bits of
I
text.
could have went there with your brother.
And
with
now
the
we can
Luke, that
afford
would've
to
been
increase the
perfect.
spacing in the text a little bit to make it look a little bit more roomy.
Because it is so pretty.
So I think I had 18 on the other one, so I'm going to put 18 here as well, and 18 here as well.
Yeah.
There we go. So we've got all three bits of text,
like
and
my
now
setup
all we
here.
need is just a little bit of body text. For the body text, I'm going to use a Lorem Ipsum. So I'm going to use one of these generators and just get some text generated, and I'm going to copy a little bit of it
Which is nice,
and put it into my design. Replace that text with this, and that's a little bit too much, so let's make it a bit smaller.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we're
that's what
going
I
to
was
have
saying
some
about,
text
like,
which
you
is
know,
going to
like,
go just below this
sometimes
section.
you just got to do that. And
So
it doesn't
it's
matter.
still a
Like,
little bit too
you
much.
know,
Let's get rid
whatever
of the last
people need,
sentence.
you
That looks
just
pretty
gotta
good.
say, no, I
Now
need to do
again,
this
we want to
for
keep our
myself and
design
this.
consistent, so we're going to make sure it's
Do I
again
either
left
understand
aligned
or not?
using the same
And
font
it really
as
doesn't
before.
matter.
And
Yes.
we've now got a bit of body text, which I'm going
You
to
gotta do what you
further
gotta
style
do.
by changing the color
That's the
of
way
each
they
of these. So I want to go for maybe like a
gotta do
dark
what you gotta do.
grayish, like one of these. And the same for the
But
body text.
we'll see how
That way it
goes.
doesn't
Like,
sort of stand out so much.
I
And I'm
gotta
going to
mark it
copy
on
this
Saturday
so
and,
that I put it on
like I
all
said,
of the
on
other
Sunday, but that's not a big
features.
deal. I was like,
Notice
almost
the
like, oh,
alignment
maybe
here.
that'll be the
I've
day we
got
go out
all the
and
pictures aligned with each other,
have dinner
all of
and
these
we'll go
circles
get
center
that
aligned
freaking
with
meat
each
rock.
picture. I've got
Yeah,
all the
you can show
text
me what I need
lying
to buy.
along the left, and this just makes the design look a lot
Would that
tighter
work?
and a lot more consistent.
That way I
And
just,
notice how with the layout,
I'll
I've
just
tried to
throw it in
keep
the
it
van and then
interesting
I'll
by having
take it
some
home and I can
pictures
go
that
go
break
tell
up the
them on this
text
yard on
and
it.
making sure that each
Just
body of
plain
text
Jane
is
Moe
not
again, so
overwhelming. It's
it
not
just
too
needs all
long,
that
like
tall
a
grass
big
left to
long
go.
sentence. But instead,
Then
it's short
somewhere I
enough
gotta
to be
find those
easily
plants that I
read
planted in
quickly.
that mound by the shed.
Now, the other thing you'll notice is that there's a degree of hierarchy that's being
And then
established
maybe I
here,
can
right?
find all the stuff around
Clearly,
that
the thing that I
fire pit,
really want
'cause
people to know is that my
a lot
hotel
of
is
that I'm
called
almost
a
thinking about
hotel.
it stacking it
But
more
in
organized
addition,
it
I've
as
also
best as I
got,
can and
beautiful
take a
food
picture
being
of
more
it and say,
important than the body text
for
that
sale.
explains that paragraph, and each of these images
Put it
also
on
being
Marketplace
more
and sell them.
important because, let's face it, most people look at the pictures and don't
I
read
know
anything,
Tracy
right?
was buying
So that's our
stuff like
second
that
part
like
of the
crazy
website
when
done.
she was at.
And we're now onto the
She
last
went all
part,
the way
which
into
is going to
Grand Prairie
be
to buy
the contact page. So this
planter
contact
thing,
page,
hanging
I'm again
planter
going to
baskets
search
that
for
somebody
maybe a photo
threw the
of
plants away and kept
something
the
that's
basket
quite
and then sold it
fashionable,
here for $5.
contemporary, tropical. Maybe we can just
And I was like,
find a picture of a pineapple. And this one looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and position this photo so that it's the same size
yeah.
as the design. And now I can move it up so that only the
I'm just
bottom
gonna
shows up my pineapples. So there we go. We've
do
got
something about
1,
that.
2, and 3, and the last
'Cause I
part
don't
is
need them
just a
anymore. I'm
contact me
not
page.
having a big
The
green
contact me
thing
page
and
is
then
also going to need some
I was like,
title
even if I
text.
do put
Let's
a
just
root
call
and
that
whatever and grow
stay.
plants in
So
there,
when they want to stay, they
it'd
can
be
take a
better
look at
as
this
the outdoor
section.
kitchen.
And we're going to again copy this style that we had from before so that we
Well,
can
I was
actually
thinking it's a
replicate
great
it
place
down
to
here.
set it all up.
And
The
we
table's
keep our
already in there,
design again consistent. It has the
you know,
same theme, the
and it
same
gets all of
color
that
palette,
stuff
the same
off the ground
typography.
and out
This is
around
a little
off the
bit too
yard.
big though, so let's make it a bit
It'll give it a
smaller
home and
so
a
it
place to
fits onto
be,
this page.
open air right now
And
is
again,
fine
I'm
because
going
that'll work
to
too.
be consistent with our geometric shapes, which is lending that sort of modern feel. I've
So
got
I
a
already
a
warned
sort
you
of
guys we were gonna
rectangle, a
clean that all up
circle,
and
more
get that done,
circles.
so.
So let's pick another shape from here.
But I was
Maybe
thinking,
some
yeah,
sort of
Sunday I'll hook
a
up with you and
hexagon.
see if
That
your
looks pretty
auntie
good.
wants to come along
Let's
or
add the
Nancy
hexagon, make it a
Uncle
bit
Jamie can meet us in
smaller.
town and
We
go
can
for
maybe
dinner.
move our pineapples down a bit
And if they don't wanna, then it'll be just
and
you and I.
change this so that it's white.
Yeah.
and make it
We'll go to that
even a
Tito's.
bit smaller. I think something
And-
like that
and
would
have
do
some of
quite
that
well. So now the
Indian
final
food
thing I want to
stuff
add
there.
is some sort of mailing address,
Yeah.
email address, phone number, which is
I've
going to
been
go
wanting
in
to
here and it's
have
going to
some of
be
that again, 'cause I
nicely
know it's
aligned
vegan.
with
I'm
this
pretty
word
sure their stuff is
stay.
pretty healthy.
So let's go ahead and take this word and make it right aligned so that this line pops up
But
when
I
I try
love
to
that
align
stuff
it
because they got
like
some really
so.
nice curry sauces.
And let's just
and
make
that
sure that it
white sauce
actually
that they
still
have. I don't
fits
know what's in
in.
that, but it sure is good.
So maybe we have to move this text up a little bit, reduce the spacing a little. I think a lot of times you do have to play around with your design
Mhm.
just so that it starts looking good to you. You might have to shift things a little bit and be flexible with
Yeah.
those rules that we've talked about.
Bad.
So now all we need to make sure is
We'll go
that
to
the
that one,
word
and then
is
we'll-
right
we'll
aligned
let Tabby
and
pick the
our
next one, and then
text
we'll
is
go to
also
that one,
right
and
aligned so that we
just
can
do
actually
this every
line them
once in a
up
while.
together so that they actually
Yeah.
look like they're on the
It's
same
the end of the month, so
vertical
it's a good
alignment.
reason.
Now, if we can just mess around with the size of the hexagon and make sure that everything is still within the hexagon,
Yes.
and we've pretty much finished our design now.
Yes, and
What did
I've
that
been
take?
wanting to
Maybe
go to
20
that one,
minutes?
and I was like,
And
I
we
think
managed to
Tazzie's loved
apply
it.
a lot of things that we've
Place.
learned from user interface design, user experience
Right
design,
up our
color theory,
alley,
and
like,
typography
not some
to
place we
create this
wanna eat, but
3-page, very modern looking
well,
website
let's do
for
that
a
on Sunday
hotel.
then.
So at this point,
Make
there's
it
a
a date.
really cool feature in Canva which lets you just publish the website. So if you click on this publish button and you scroll
Either
all the
or.
way down and you
Do you wanna
click
go next
on
Sunday or this
website,
Sunday?
then you can actually select the web style as standard and then
Next
open this
Sunday?
as an actual web page. Notice how it's placed my 3 pages together into an actual web page. And I can scroll down and also navigate to it through the navigation bar.
Isn't that July
Now, of
long
course, we
weekend?
don't have mobile
Wow,
optimization, we don't have any code.
They usually go down to the river. I guess we could. Well, they go there all the time. So that's what I was wondering. I was like, they're probably gonna be down at Pipestone. 'Cause they go there all the time. Jamie does too. Every once in a while, though, they go to Saskatoon Mountain. He likes going up there too. And he mentioned about doing that a few times. He likes to go over there too. And I was telling Rose, I was like, well, the kids used to go out here dirt biking around and whatever. I said, actually, we went here one weekend. Was it for Father's Day or was it Mother's Day? And we went up there with the kids, remember, and I freaking got my car stuck on that fire pit that it was buried in the grass. And I was like, shit, when I need fucking ramps and stuff to lift it up and slide it back without damaging anything. Yeah. I'm gonna go have a look and see what well, this Sunday I think will be chillaxing after the market because it usually takes me a day to recover after that. I don't know what it is about. It feels like I get drained by hanging around with people all day. Oh, I got Berlin on the 30th. Okay, Tuesday. Oh, there's nothing happening that weekend. I don't even have anything on Saturday that weekend. Yeah. I got nothing until the 8th, July 8th. We got our Grimshaw one for in Canada Day on the 1st. But there's nothing on the weekend. Nothing.